This is the Fishbowl Podcast, of course. Thank you very much for listening in. Today I've got a guest that I'm very excited about. He's came in after a 5-hour train journey, or 4.5 hours, so I appreciate it a lot. Rather than me give a description of what you have done in your career and what you do now, why don't you just give us, say, your back page cover of, this is the Neil Woods book. How would you summarise what you've done in your life?
Well, I'm a former police officer. And I mean, how much do you want? Do you want the summary of all the chapters?
Yeah, like a slight summary of what you've done in life and what you're sort of up to now, really.
Okay, well, I went to university by mistake in 1989. Was it 1988? And dropped out after a few months. And I was wondering what to do with myself. And so I was going to go backpacking around Europe, which appealed to me. Some friends had done that. It sounded quite exciting, fruit picking and just trying to make your way, really. But then I saw an advertisement for the police. So I thought, well, that would also be interesting. I was unable to make my mind up, so I flipped a coin. It came up heads and I ended up applying for the police. And that's brought me on a very long and twisted journey, which has eventually brought me here. But one of the twists and turns on the way was that in the police, fairly early on, in 1993, I got an attachment to the drug squad. And whilst there, one of them asked me if I wanted to have a go at buying some crack cocaine, which wasn't a question I was expecting. And he gave me 20 quid, and I went to this blue door and knocked on this door. And I asked this huge chap if he would sell me a stone of crack, and he did. And I went back to the drug squad like this. Yeah, look, I've got it. And that then determined the next 14 years of my life. Because, so you're gonna chip in there.
Yeah, on that, I'm just thinking, like, obviously at these stages, just to put it into context, this wasn't standard practice for the police force to just be like, go buy some drugs and let's see how it goes. What?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't at all. I mean, I wasn't the first person to do undercover work.
Mm-hmm.
There was much more sophisticated undercover work than the stuff that I did that had been going on for a long time. But the kind of bottom-up sort of street-level undercover work that later became known as level 2 undercover work, that hadn't been done before at all. And the reason that the drug squad wanted to try this was because, the same reason I got a drug squad attachment, really, in that there was a moral panic going on. And there's always a moral panic about drugs. There's always some new panic in the tabloids, with dehumanising language, calling people zombies or think of the children. Lots of, these kind of moralising stories. They're coming all the time. But the worst of them all was there in 1993, and that was about crack cocaine. Because the tabloid newspapers had been spinning stories about how crack was destroying neighbourhoods in the United States for years before we actually even had any crack in the UK. So the moment that crack did hit our streets, there was a pretty general collective panic. And the newspapers went ballistic and the politicians panicked. So the politicians said to all of the police forces, your priority now is drugs, and specifically heroin and crack. And so there's loads of pressure on the police to get results. And that's what led that drug squad detective to say to me, and look at me weirdly and say, do you fancy having a go at buying some crack cocaine? And the thing is, it worked, because that was a conviction like that. Evidence immediately, and the drug squad would spend so much time and energy in the surveillance as they do, really hard-working people, to catch people, and then suddenly there's this tactic where you can knock on someone's door and buy drugs off them, and that's it, they're fucked.
And they were completely bewildered to it as well. I'm just curious, like, how did you personally feel about this? Because obviously you're a young lad. Well, how old were you here? You were...
I was 19 when I went in the police. I was 23.
23.
I was a young 23, though, to be honest.
So, like, I'm just curious how excited you were, because I understand that you were this close to being sacked from the police, and then all of a sudden you get this, I imagine, just boost of adrenaline from going to this front door and buying these drugs.
Yeah, I mean, because I was a crap police officer. I really was. When I started as a 19-year-old, I was a very young 19-year-old. I was quite naive. And I'd sort of grown up to believe you can reason with anybody and converse with anybody. And it's actually not true. A drunken person is still going to want to punch you in the face, however much reason you try quite often. And I was a bit taken aback by how violent people could be. I was obviously very sheltered. So yeah, I didn't deal with conflict very well the first few years, and I was a crap cop, and I almost got kicked out a few times. But I'd sort of found my feet by the time I got that attachment. I was okay, but yeah, I did get a buzz from it because I was starting to find that I really wanted to do well, and I wanted to catch bad guys. It's what police tend to want to do. They want to catch the bad people, and they want to make the streets safer. People report a crime to them. The police want to solve the crime. You get quite driven by that. It can be very depressing when you don't have success. So suddenly I've got this opportunity to catch. I mean, this first guy, he was actually a fairly notorious gangster. I didn't go through a runner. I actually quite luckily went straight to the main man. He'd got convictions for grievous bodily harm and all sorts of things. So yeah, it was exciting. But interestingly, I talk about his reputation of GBH and things like that, but actually he was really nice to me. He was quite polite, really, and he even said to me, "Mind how you go. Don't get yourself arrested." Which I thought was nice.
It was.
Yeah, that's nice advice. But it's a very important point that he was nice, actually. And as the story develops, I like to refer back to that because it's an important. Because it was the first time it happened. No one saw that tactic coming. They had no idea cops were going to start doing that at that point at all. So that's an interesting baseline to refer back to how things change over time, you see.
Yeah, please do keep referring back to that because obviously I've read your book, Good Cop, Bad War. Strongly recommend that, link in description. But it really does seem like the war on drugs, as you talk about, does progressively get worse and worse. I kind of want to just find out what happened after that first assignment. They're like, okay, this is a cool idea. It's working all right. I understand that you went to try and go to another drug dealer's house and he wasn't in. And I believe you went to some sort of betting house.
A what house?
It's not a betting house. It's
Bookies.
Bookies and betting house.
Betting house will do.
Betting house will do. It's a new term.
Once I worked through your accent, I knew what you meant. Yeah.
That's not. Don't get me wrong. No one up here says betting house. I don't know where that came from. Bookies.
Yeah.
So what happened with that instance?
Well, I mean, I couldn't find the guy. I got sent into the bookies as the place where I could buy some crack, and it was an extraordinary because I'd never been in a bookies in my life, and it was really strange. I'm trying to work out what working undercover actually means, and you think, I've got to look like I fit in, and I felt like I'd stepped onto the surface of Mars, to be honest, and. It was in the Normanton area of Derby, and it was just full of real characters. But I scored there. It wasn't particularly difficult there, to be honest. A few interesting conversations, and they were wondering why I was there. But again, it was polite, and I came away with a decent stone of crack.
So at this point, was this something that the police force definitely wanted to pursue more, and sort of? And were you the only really one in your region who were doing these sort of assignments?
Yeah, I was the only non-drug squad, and the drug squad hadn't really done it to any great degree previously. And so, yeah, the idea of actually having a specialist street-level undercover person, I think I was the first in the region. And but of course, the drug squads work with each other in terms of, well, they did then at cross-border. And the word got out very quickly, and then suddenly I was in demand. Across the region. I'd be lent out to different forces. So but the operation went from a few days to a few weeks, and in no time at all, it would be a few months. You couldn't do it in any less than a few months.
I'm curious to ask you about this, the instance with Bigger and Michonne, because this is an instance where you went to a new house, a new dealer, and he didn't really sell you what you intended to buy from him. Yeah,
it was a club actually. I was trying to get close to this dealer called Bigger Williams. People who live in the Midlands will probably know this character. I think he's in jail again now, but and I'm not. It's interesting. Bigger Williams. There's some names in the book are the real names, and some are not. So the lawyers had to go through massive discussions about who could go in the book and who couldn't. The thing is, Bigger's got convictions that's been published in the newspapers. So I'm not. What's the word?
It's not breaking news, really.
Yeah, no, but everything I say is corroborated, so I can use his real name. So people out there in the Midlands will know Bigger Williams. But I was just desperate to try and get this guy because he was the main man at the time. Anyway, I was asking around, and I ended up at this club, and this guy says, "Yeah, I can go. I know Bigger. Yeah, I'm a runner for Bigger. What do you want?" And I says, "Well, I'll just have 1 stone." Yeah, no problem. Went in this club. A few minutes later, came out, sold me the little Rizzler wrap, a little Rizzler twist, gave him the 20 quid. I went back thinking, yeah, easy this every time. Anyway, I undid it later on, and it was a stone off the ground. It wasn't crack at all. So be careful what you ask for, I suppose.
But it's true. This is like what happens to crackhead people who are addicted to these drugs. Like this is what happens to them. They're not going to get evidence up front. They're going to get taken advantage of. Is this something you had to adapt to through your time working undercover?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've been ripped off so many times. I've been sold curry powder. People have snatched the money and legged it, and all sorts of things. Yeah, but people who use drugs, whether problematically or not, because they are outside the law, they don't have the protection of the law. So by banning these drugs, this world of crime is created.
And that's an interesting stance that you're on, because if people aren't familiar with you, what is your stance on the drug policy?
Oh well, I've probably put more effort into catching drug dealers than as much effort as any cop in the UK. I've put people in prison for over 1,000 years total for drug dealing. I put huge amounts of years into it, and it was all completely futile. The war on drugs is a disaster, and the attempt to police drugs has actually caused the problems that we're trying to avoid. It's caused the deaths, it's caused the crime, it's caused organised crime to grow, and the only way to end this nightmare of the war on drugs is to declare peace by fully regulating all of the drugs markets, to take the power away from organised crime. And that's the only way we'll win this. See,
this is something that I never really... Because I think the standard opinion would be, to someone who's obviously not educated on the matter, like I wasn't at all, it's just, well, no, that's a ridiculous idea, because then people are just going to do more and more. But the more I sort of read the book and the more I looked into it, it was like, it does make sense. It's sort of taking the ammunition away from the drug dealers, that idea of just arresting one drug dealer and then someone's put in that place, and what's really what you even do, what you're achieving there. I was actually having an argument with my friend the other day. I was trying to argue your side, but I wasn't obviously that in tune with it enough to sort of back it up. But he was pulling up instances how, like, say, the prices will be different. It'll be cheaper from an illegal standpoint if you went to an illegal dealer. Would that be true, do you think? Do you think the market would still be there, just at a cheaper price?
Well, it depends on the drug, but I mean, once you've got a drug regulated and the control is from the government rather than gangsters, then you can tweak that regulation in order to make it better. And price is an important regulatory tool. So, for example, the mistake that they've just made in Canada, where they've just legally regulated cannabis, the mistake that they've made, and I was speaking to the head of Health Canada just at the weekend, and some other policymakers from Canada, they're acknowledging their mistake is that they've made the commodity too expensive. So there's still an illicit market thriving. But the thing is, they've got control now. They can lower the price, they can lower the taxes, they can improve the quality, they can do whatever they need to do to reduce that illicit market. And the evidence is clear from Canada that less underage people are now using the drug. So there has been a restricted access for young people, and it's young people we need to protect. Because dealers don't ask for ID. They just ask for the colour of your money. So 13-year-olds can buy cannabis, and we shouldn't be allowing that.
Definitely.
But it's the same for other drugs, and it really does depend on the drug. Heroin, for example, you're not going to have that for sale in the corner shop. you have it prescribed by doctors like we used to in the UK. There was no crime associated with heroin in the UK until we banned heroin. None at all. And at the point that we banned heroin in the UK, there were 1,049 heroin users in this country. 1,049. And the number was falling. That's in 1970. So at the moment that the control of that drug was given to organised crime, when they stopped doctors prescribing it to addicts, or rather problematic users, from that moment, 20 years later, there were 300,000 heroin users. Very straightforward cause and effect, because the doctor didn't have any incentive to find new customers. The consumer didn't have any incentive to find new customers. But as soon as that market's given to organised crime, that's when we had the epidemic. Cause and effect.
That's an extremely interesting point that you brought up there. And it's do you find that there's a growing conversation about this now? Because it's sort of like there's more. I feel like it's the more that you look into this, it's more that it makes sense. I mean, I'm going to quote something that I've heard here before. I've heard it from a source, but this is going to be complete paraphrasing. But I know the general gist of it. But it was, I think they ran an experiment where they took some heroin addicts and they said, "You come to us." It was a medical place, proper scientific thing going on. Come to us. We'll give you as much heroin as you want. Just don't come to these dealers. And what they found was that at the beginning they got their handful and just took as much as they wanted, but eventually they even lowered their own dosage down to something that they more handleable, and they end up doing less heroin as well. So even on that front, you might find people even reducing their usage through it, perhaps.
Yeah, well, that's the evidence from Switzerland. Now, interestingly, Switzerland used British evidence to decide their heroin policy. In 1994, they started prescribing heroin to people with a heroin substance misuse disorder. And they did allow the heroin user to decide how much they had. And if they want to increase using it each day, they can. It's up to them. Free will. And in almost every case, they carried on increasing their amount between 6 and 8 weeks. And then at the 8 weeks point, they started reducing their own usage. Because if you take care of people and they no longer have a chaotic lifestyle looking for where they're going to get their next drug, then they've got space for other things. They've got space for other conversations and interests. And if you consider that most problematic heroin users, 2/3 of them in fact, are self-medicating for some kind of childhood trauma, either physical or sexual abuse or neglect, 2/3 of them, there's lots of academic evidence which says that. When you consider that, traumatised people need space for that care. And they're only going to have space for that care or treatment for their trauma if they are rescued from the exploitation of the illicit market, if they're rescued from the exploitation of gangsters. And the best way to do that is to become the dealer. You provide the clean drug for them. So very, very powerful evidence that that's the way to take care of people. And yet governments still want to have that moral judgment and arrest and put people in prison who are just trying to struggle with trauma.
Do you think it's just like sort of like the sort of being stubborn on their mindset on it, because it is quite a stigma. It's like the point you're proving, even though it's backed with all this evidence and it's backed with all this reasoning, and you're not just someone who's coming from anywhere. You're a person who's been undercover and has worked in this field. Do you think that their lack of openness to this idea is a bit ignorant of them in a way?
Well, I mean, I can't judge because I used to believe the same way.
Mm-hmm.
When I first started working undercover and I saw people who had problematic heroin use, I looked down on them with lots of stigma. I just thought, well, these people shouldn't have taken it in the first place. They shouldn't have made that decision, and they should find more willpower to stop themselves. I was incredibly judgmental, and I look back now and I try and place my brain into that person who was that judgmental, and I can't. It's difficult to understand, but I can't judge other people for being just as judgmental. They perhaps don't understand yet.
Yeah, because there's always a cause for everything, isn't there? Like you say, a lot. Was it 2/3 of self-medicating for trauma? That shows there's a cause that wasn't their fault that's had this sort of effect. I'm just curious to take us back to sort of your point in this career. Now we've got a bit of context on your standpoint on all this. So what ended up happening anyways with that bigger situation? Did he go down?
Yeah, he did. It was a real struggle to get to know Bigger, because he ripped me off as well another time. And what I ended up doing is going up and down the road in Normanton, which is Normanton Road, in Derby. And I knew that he was up and down this road all the time, and I just kept walking up and down this road, waiting for his car to come down the road. And when I saw it coming down, I jumped in front of his car in the road and made him do an emergency brake. Thankfully, he didn't run me over.
Yes.
But then I went to the driver's seat and I said, look, you ripped me off for that 20 the other day. Let's forget that, but just serve me now. And he said, yeah, all right.
Do you think that was needed, that sort of shock, because he was just ripping you off and sort of just, you didn't think you were going to do anything about it, that sort of drastic action was going to forcing him into noticing you, maybe?
Yeah, I couldn't see what else to do, to be honest, because
in front of his car.
because I'd got into a situation where he'd ripped me off, and how else was I going to confront him in that situation? So, but he I mean, he had a pretty terrifying sidekick as well. Who was this sort of minder type person. The two of them with him were cars, so they were pretty scary individuals. But I couldn't see what else to do. So anyway, then he served me up, and eventually I ended up scoring off him quite a few times. And I remember when for the last one I did what they call a buy bust. Didn't do many of those later on. It was quite an early tactic. The buy bust means you do the last buy, and then the money that you've just given them is still in their possession. So you've got all the numbers of the banknotes all recorded and everything. And I remember the drug squad swooping in this car park, and he tried to get away, and they crashed into his car. And he had a Mercedes, and he said, "Oh no, watch my car!" And he smashed the end of his car. Anyway, then he realised it was a squad, and he was dragged out of this and put in the drug squad car. And I remember the drug squad detective looking like panicked. Absolutely panicked. His look on his face was like almost terror. I thought, well, God, what's gone on? Anyway, the DC, the drug squad DC, he's winding the window down. He's leaning right out, and he says, "Oh God, bastard, shit himself." And he's leaning. I thought something terrible had happened. Well, I suppose from his point of view, it was quite terrible. But
no, is that something that happens often?
Not to my knowledge. No, not to my experience. Mind you, I wouldn't like to be on the receiving end of a drug squad arrest. Oh. It's pretty terrifying, because you don't even realise that they're just a bunch of scruffy big blokes.
Yeah,
and one woman. You did have some women in the drug squad.
Well, so does he stay in the car and then they just like, all right, let's go back? Or do you?
Yeah, apparently they had to take him all the way to the police station, and with it, well, the DC had his head out the window the whole time.
So from that point, what happened? Did you get some sort of recognition for the work that you're doing at this point?
I think I did a few more jobs, and then they gave me a commendation for bravery, that kind of thing. I don't often sort of admit to that, to be honest, because it sort of sticks in my throat a little bit, because
in hindsight.
Yeah, because in hindsight, now I look back and I just remember the harm I was doing, and so the idea that I got an award or series of awards for it just doesn't seem quite right,
That's really an interesting way to look at it, because at the time, obviously, you don't have all this space knowledge that you have now of like what was actually going on, and no one can blame you for that. Obviously, you were just doing what you were told, and a very good job of that. That's very. So is that something that you don't really take pride in that those?
No, God, no, not in the slightest. In fact, I'm diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and an element of that is also moral injury, which is another sort of condition. And moral injury was first recognised in veterans returning from the Vietnam War. So there's a peculiar aspect of my PTSD. I mean, I manage it pretty well most of the time, but when it gets me, it can be really problematic. And one aspect of it is that I can't help judging myself then by the standards I have now, which isn't logical. But then PTSD, anxiety isn't logical.
Yeah.
But I can't help it. I can't help, even though the behaviour I was doing then was because of what I was brought up to believe, the system I was in, that my values that I had at the time. But I look back and I can't help looking back in horror at some of the things I did.
The only thing I'd argue against that, and then it's not that it mean anything come from me, but coming from the outside, it's like, yes, you've done these things that are, and you think right now are morally wrong, but what you've done is you've changed your thoughts on that, and now you're trying to affect the other way around. And because you've got this base history in that field, you have a bit more oomph behind what you're trying to do now. It's like, look, I've been here, I've done that, I've done this, and I'm saying it's wrong, and what I did wrong, and we need to do this. And that sort of, in a way, allows you to affect more positive change now rather than being someone without that background.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I get airtime, I get podcasts like this, radio and TV sometimes because of the background and experience I have, because obviously I can say how it is from the front line. But I see myself as duty bound to do that. Having come to the conclusions that I have, then I've got to, really, haven't I? I think.
So what happens next? What's the next major step for you from here? As you sort of establishing this work, this is your sort of, you feel, and I understand that this is completely secretive. You can't tell any of your family, you can't tell any of your friends about what you're doing in order to maintain cover.
No, exactly. It was made very clear to me that I couldn't tell anybody at all, and so I didn't tell my wife or family or anyone what I was doing, and it was for safety as well, because it was made quite clear to me that the world of the illicit drug supply causes corruption. I had no idea at that stage just how bad that can be. But it was a matter of safety. But it makes those times of high risk even more intense, because you can't really talk about them with anyone. That's what
I was thinking. I'm like, because you don't have this outlet, and to those who you really would want to talk about it, it must make the whole sort of scenario stressful. I'm just curious, what steps did you take from here? So you've sort of you're going in from, I understand, as working as a normal officer, and then you're getting taken away, and you can't tell anyone why, and you're working with the drug squad. Was there any other major thing from that point onwards that stands out to you that was the next sort of leap up? I understand that you went clubbing a lot after someone who's referenced in the book as Shotgun.
Oh yeah, I mean, most of the stuff I did was heroin and crack, but there was a move to, dance music was growing all the time through the early 90s, and by the mid 90s it really was huge, and there were some great events and sort of super clubs. The Criminal Justice Act shut down a lot of the free parties, so club culture grew, really. It went more mainstream. So I went into one club in Derby called Progress, which was a fantastic club, and I love the music as well. I mean, I love all music, almost all music, but I was really getting into the electronic music of the 90s. I love British rave, marvellous. But Progress was around the time of hard house really taking shape, and it was a really good scene. The DJs like Boy George was there quite often, Tony DeVitt, the great Tony DeVitt. And so I did a job there. Now the way it was sold to me is there was some big gangsters controlling the drug supply in the club, or clubs that I did. And this one particular one, his nickname was Shotgun. Theoretically, or apparently, the word on the street was because he'd killed someone with a shotgun. We don't know who, but. And I spent several weeks going clubbing and getting paid to go clubbing, which was great fun. Obviously, drugs are not difficult to buy. It's not the world of crack and heroin where there's the threat of immediate violence all the time. It's a much more friendly environment. It's friendlier drugs, isn't it? MDMA, I've come to understand now. It's potentially of huge benefit to mankind. It's not something which should be feared. It should be controlled so that we get good purity and control it for adult use. And scientifically now, it's interesting, coming from my point of view as someone with PTSD, there's now exciting evidence that it can be used to actually treat that condition as well. But at the time, I thought it was an evil scourge. And at the time, I thought that drugs are ruining this music. How I didn't understand that drugs were an essential part of that music, I don't know, because they are. You know, you can't be coy about it. There wouldn't have been the dance music explosion without the associated drugs that were part of the scene. It fuels the creativity. But I didn't understand that then. I didn't get it. So I pursued my club dealers with as much enthusiasm as anything else. Anyway, the conclusion of the job, and would you believe they raided it just as the first record dropped with Tony DeVitt DJing?
I wanted to touch on that because did you give? You're shaking your head now. Did you say it right? At least wait halfway through the set.
Yeah, just let me listen to some Tony DeVitt. Of course, they don't give a shit about hard house, do they? So yeah, they raided it, and interestingly, because the drug squad came in, and there was lots of uniformed police as well. You know, the lights went up. Quite shocking and intense.
I know, like that's sort of like out of a film scene. Like,
yeah,
I imagine
it was weird. I knew it was coming, and it was still really like stark and shocking because I'd never seen the club with the lights on.
Especially if one's on drugs as well. They were like,
lights went on, all the massive pupils all around. Like everyone's caught in the headlights like a rabbit. Wherever you look, you know, massive pupils. And of course, the club looks really weird because I've never seen it with the lights on. And Tony DeVitt looked like, you know, you've interrupted my set. But anyway, there was quite a big room where people danced, but there was also a chill out room at the side, and then the chill out room led to sort of like a smoking area. It's like a yard sort of thing. And one of the DCs came in and came past these 5 lads there, and he says, "You lot, hands on your heads." So they put their hands on their heads. Anyway, then he went in, the place was secured, everyone's up against the wall, and people were being lined up for searching and everything. And there's drugs all over the floor. It's like a sudden explosion of Smarties or something. There's drugs everywhere, little plastic bags everywhere. Anyway, the DC went back to the 5 students, and they were students in the yard, and they're still there with their hands on their heads. Anyway, searched them in time, and each one of them had some drugs on them. Each one of them had like 2 or 3 pills on them. And he said to me, "What? I've been in there 5 minutes. Why don't you just ditch all this?" And they said, "Well, you told us to put our hands on our heads." But I mean, that's the tragedy of it, isn't it? Because they're good people who've never come into contact with the police before. They just happen to like house music and going to this great club, and they don't want to drink. They want to take pills instead. But they're good people. They've been law-abiding, so law-abiding that when a cop says put your hands on your heads, they do as they're told.
When I read that part in the book, I found myself thinking I wouldn't have thrown those away. I would never have thought to do that. I could see myself in that exact same scenario, and it's right. Like, I can think of so many of my friends who would do this. Like, if you law-abiding, you wouldn't.
Yeah.
And yet those people get criminal records. Do you get criminal records?
Yeah, each one of them now has their life blighted with a criminal record for possession of Class A, and that impacts on people's lives. Yeah, for wanting to go dancing.
And it's at an age where you're not fully matured. You don't really know that you a bit like if I look at myself 3 years ago, and I'm still young now, and I'm like, he's an idiot. So I can't imagine in hindsight from however many years. So it's weird how you get that massive stain on your life from something so simple.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Did you ever come into contact with shotgun personally throughout the whole?
Oh yeah, I mean, I bought some speed off him one night, and I went to sniff it because it looked just like glucose, and he had me up against the wall and threatened to kill me for sniffing his speed.
That's polite.
Yeah, and he was arrested, but he got off actually, because I worked with someone else undercover on that one, and she couldn't pick him out on the lineup. The reason was she didn't realise there would be a lineup. No one had explained the whole process to her. You'd think that'd be quite an essential thing for the investigators to point out.
Possibly.
And she says, "Well, I don't know what he looks like because I never have." I says, "What do you mean?" I says, "Well, I was never wearing my glasses in the club."
Do you not have like these things in like I don't know if I'm watching too much telly, but when you have the big pictures of them on the wall with strings, is that not going on? Do you not have like a big picture of Shotgun on the wall where she's like, "Oh yeah, he's the one from the picture"?
Oh well, no, because that would have contaminated the evidence.
Oh well, so you got off. That's That's very unfortunate. There's also another point where you come across a guy called Alec, which I'm really curious to talk about. Can you recall that instance at all?
Yeah, that was a pub in Whittick, and it was a weird place because the intelligence for the place, what the police believed was going on there was extraordinary. And I thought, like, you're making this up. That's some kind of cartoon.
What
pub.
were they telling you about it?
Well, it was, and it turned out to be true that Alex was running a massive car theft ring, and he was really clever. He what he would do is he had a contact in the car industry where he'd steal the petrol caps from the cars, and in those days, the most modern cars had a key to open it, and it was the same as the ignition key. So what he was doing is he'd got a contact in the industry where from that petrol cap they could produce the key, and the key was what disabled the security. So what he was doing is stealing petrol caps, remembering exactly what the make and model of the car was in his head.
What?
In his head, and he's got a big list of them in his head.
So he was remembering all these things.
Yeah, all these things. So
I
then
can't remember my own registration.
I know. Well, he wouldn't know the exact registration, but he'd know the make and model and year. So that a month later, you think, right, it's about time to steal that car now. I've got the key for that one. This is the one I'll do tonight. He'd have the registration plate ready to go up to the car, stick it on. So it'd be like a clone car. So if the police PNC it, if the police check it on the computer, it would show as that make model of car belonging to such and such, and it wouldn't show as the stolen one that it would if the plate was the real plate. So we'd have those, stick them on, have the key to drive away with the car, keep it stashed until he could get it cut up and have its identity changed properly. He had a team of people doing all this. It was amazing. But apparently he was into antique burglaries, dealing loads of coke and crack. So he was the main target for the place. But there were gangsters meeting from all over the place. It was extraordinary.
How did you like get your way in there? Because I imagine at this place, it's sort of for a new face. I imagine it's hard to sort of get those contacts.
Played a lot of pool. I worked with someone else, and we played a lot of pool. In fact, I remember playing this one guy, and he'd got a scar right down his face to his mouth, right down, big, gory scar. And I was playing against him one day, and we were playing for money. And I says, "Oh, you don't mind me asking you, where do you get your scar from?" He says, "Oh, I was playing pool against someone, and they beat me at pool. So I smashed him over the head with a pool cue. So they slashed me with a Stanley knife." I thought, I'm going to let you win.
Yeah. Maybe two.
Yeah. Yeah, so there were some interesting characters in there, really, really interesting.
Did you ever have like backup nearby for these missions? Because like, say these people are hardened criminals, like actual serious gangsters who over a game of pool can slash you or hit you with a pool cue. So did you have any sort of backup, anything that you like, right, this is going wrong, come save me?
No, for most jobs, no. And having backup nearby is just one more thing to think about. So you don't really want any extra things to think about. So most jobs I had no backup at all. But actually, for that job in Whittick, it was a village as well, small village. The village of Whittick, the signal was that if I was really in problems, I would pick up an ashtray and chuck it out the window and smash the window. All
right. So how did you move on in that pub and sort of like work your way up in sort of stature and reach sort of Alex? Was he sort of like the big sort of important guy in that area, sort of the leader in a way?
Yeah, well, he was, yeah. And I saw him order a beating of someone for a £10 drug debt, and he got dragged out just for a debt of £10. But yeah, I just got to know him. But I made the mistake, actually. I've lots of mistakes in that job, but the big mistake I made was making out that I was a connoisseur of amphetamines, and I'm not at all.
Yeah.
But it just seemed like a good thing to talk about, the different types, and the different.
Because you would have the base knowledge of anything.
Base being a good word. Base amphetamine, yeah. So I did. And so anyway, one day he came to me and says, "Hey, I've got you a present." And he held out this little plastic bag, and it had this toxic-looking pink goo in it. And you could almost see it dissolving the plastic in front of your eyes. And the smell was incredible. It smelled like the urine from a glue-sniffing cat. That sort of perfect, nasty, chemically
One
smell.
hell of a description.
Yeah, but if anyone smelt really strong wet base amphetamine, you know exactly
God.
what I mean. So yeah, but I was quite reticent. Well, not quite reticent, but a momentary reticence went over my face, and he picked up on it. And I thought, you just picked up on my reticence there, which means I have to take some of this to head off that doubt at the pass, you know. So I put a little bit on my finger and had it, and it was like you'd almost hear it singeing my tongue.
What's the street name for this drug? Is it?
Well, it's base.
Base.
Base, yeah. Base amphetamine.
Okay.
And he said, "You'll need more than that with your tolerance." I thought, right, yeah, thanks. So I had some more, and it was incredibly strong because the average speed at the time, normal speed, was 5%. This was 40% pure. It was extraordinary. Now I knew enough about amphetamine. Now I wasn't. It might be. I might have had an amount which is going to be unpleasant, but I knew I wasn't going to overdose or anything. So I had to be driven home by somebody, and it was appalling. The anxiety was like off the scale. It really was. It was terrible. I remember being driven home thinking, no, I've got some Stella in the fridge at home. Cans of Stella. I've got 8 cans. That'll take the edge off it. It didn't at all. No. eight cans later, it's still speeding my face off. I didn't sleep properly for 3 nights.
Really?
But my house has never been as tidy.
There you go. So if you're a house cleaner and you're going to do any not recommended, that's the one.
Oh yeah, speed. I mean, it's what it's for, isn't it? To get things done. And
what's the sort of side effects of it? What is it? Because I have no knowledge about this, like what drugs do and this sort of thing. Like what did that do to you? What are the side effects of it?
Well, I had too much. That was the thing. So it was really anxious, especially the first 16 hours. It was just especially the first 4 or 5 hours of really high anxiety, really intense, sort of grotty, nasty feeling, really unpleasant. But I mean, people take them in smaller amounts. People use them as a very functional stimulant. Amphetamine used correctly can be a very useful drug, and some people like it. But if the people that like it tend to have not problematic use. I'm talking about non-problematic use. People take it in a more sensible amount and situation.
How did you move forward after this? Did you still come after your 3 sleepless nights? Did you return back to this place and how?
Yeah, and in fact, I was there for a few weeks more, I think. But it culminated actually, and this was really terrifying. They decided that because of some of the characters in there and the potential for violence from them, and also the potential for them escaping, they decided to hit the place when there were lots of these characters in there. And they decided to raid it with us in there. So myself, I worked with someone else on that. And so they did what's called rapid entry. Now, a rapid entry is basically it's specially trained cops wearing body armour. And the idea is to get into the premises and control it as fast as possible. Now, I'm told, and I can sort of believe it from afterwards, that they had everyone controlled from the point of entry in 11 seconds in that place.
Is this a big place as well? Is it what's the layout like?
It's bigger than your average pub, but everyone was really in the front room. No one was in the back, so that's probably why they did it so quick. But I knew this was coming. I knew, and even though I knew, it was still absolutely terrifying. You got a sudden fully armoured cops bursting in, shouting at the top of their voices. It's so disorientating, and you just get upended. Tables are tossed out of the way, and suddenly you're on the floor facing the carpet and plastic ties behind your back. So everyone's just trussed up like chickens.
That's an impressive amount of time.
Yeah, it was incredible. But the plastic things, they just got on and then whipped up. That's it.
So those are the ones that I think I know what those look like. So
horrible things. I lost the feeling in my thumb for about 6 weeks.
Yeah, I imagine they look like
bloody
they go
horrible.
Pretty tight,
Yeah. Horrible things.
Did you end up getting Alex from this?
No, he was there when it started with no idea where he went.
What was the aftermath from that?
Well, I mean, we considered possibly that he was tipped off.
Tipped off.
Mm.
Who do you think would have tipped him off? It's sort of too hard to tell. So from after this one, I understand you mentioned briefly before about level 1 and level 2s. I understand that because at this point you've sort of helped forge a way for this for level 2s. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I became part of the conversation about how it should take shape further, and I contributed to how the training developed across the country. Yeah.
So what were level 1s and what were like the level 1s and 2s for those who?
Well, level 1 is undercover work that's gone on for a long time. It's generally high level. It involves sophisticated background building, and it's very sophisticated work. The kind of work I did, it was less sophisticated essentially, but it got more and more sophisticated and long term as the time went on. And I suppose level 1 and 2 got closer together over time. Was
there a conversation with a level 1 agent where you were saying not a chance you'd want to do what you were doing with?
Oh yeah, on the first course, I was on the first course when and I helped design it, but I was on it, and a guy called Dave Edwards. He said, "Yeah, you're nuts. There's absolutely no way." And he'd done level 1 undercover work for 13 years at that point, and he's put some international gangsters behind bars, and he says, "There's absolutely no way I'd do what you do. You're completely nuts." And he's got a point, because actually the way they work, they tend to work in the more civilized parts of things. It's much more chaotic and unpredictable at street level, really.
Well, that's what it definitely is. Because what instances have you came in contact with a dealer or gangster where you felt like, oh, I might be in a bit of bother here?
Oh God, so many times. I suppose the first one where I really thought I was about to die was in Stoke-on-Trent, in Fenton in Stoke-on-Trent, and I'd been buying heroin off this guy for quite a while. I've been buying like weights of heroin, more than 10 bags actually, some decent weights of him. And I thought he was quite happy with me. Anyway, I went to this terrace door, and he used to sort of be between 3 different addresses in Fenton, and it was like a 2 up 2 down terrace house, but with steps up, so that you walk into the house at a higher level. Anyway, he opened this door, and the next thing I know, I've got a samurai sword to my throat. And he says, "You're fucking DS. You're drug squad. You're drug squad. I know you are." And I can feel the steel, and I think, I'm going to die here.
Do you think you were found out just like that?
Well, yeah, because your ultimate fear is someone know.
Definitely.
And he was saying, I know you are. I know you. You DS. I know you are. And his face was blood red, and he was angry, and there was saliva flying out at me from his face, and he was really shouting. And I'm thinking, he's about to slice my throat. And then this woman popped her head out sort of behind him, and she said, "I thought he was going to say he was then," and started laughing. And then he started laughing.
About the relief, I imagine, that you felt at that moment.
Well, they were winding me up. Or maybe they wanted to test me, I don't know. Or maybe he just wanted to try out his new sword. I don't know. But yeah, then they were laughing at me. And I had to sort of collect my thoughts and say, yeah, can you do me half a tea? And yeah. But that day didn't end there. Because he wouldn't do me half a tea. He was being a bit weird. So I bought 4 10 bags off him. I'm putting these 10 bags into a cigarette packet as I'm walking away. And the next thing I know, I've got a knife pressed against my stomach. It wasn't actually touching, but it was almost there. And it's this black-handled, like, really sharp-looking kitchen knife. And this guy's trying to rob me for the heroin I've just bought.
Oh my God.
And I thought, mate, I have just gone through way too much for these 4 little bags of heroin to be giving them to you now. And I thought, well, I might look like a problematic heroin user, but I do know I can run faster than your average heroin user. So I just started skipping backwards away from the blade. And you know what he had the audacity to say? He went, no, just come here a minute.
Well,
I thought, what? No.
There's
No, I won't.
nothing for you to benefit from possibly there. For those as well, you need to keep these drugs for evidence. I understand. For people who might be like, oh, you have to just give them back. You don't want them anyways. You have to keep these for evidence.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's it. I didn't want to lose them.
No coming, yeah. That's ridiculous, man. So at this moment, did you sort of become a bit more hasty in the job? Did you become a bit more like, hold on a minute, this is quite dangerous what I'm doing?
To be honest, at that stage, I was really smug. That, look at me, I can go through. I've just had a knife to my belly just after a samurai sword to my throat, and look how I can handle it. I was shaking. I've got the cortisol going through my blood. I got the post-adrenaline sort of jitters and all that. But I was thinking, I can do anything here. I just felt really powerful, and the fact that look what I can cope with. I can cope with this kind of danger, which sort of it gave me almost a bit more courage, knowing that, well, look what I've just survived. Look what I can cope with. It's a reminder of what the risks are, but look. I was really pleased with myself, and you get a bit of reputation, and people look at you like you're a nutter, but that's quite nice. You think, yeah, I am that cool. So I was deluding myself at the time that this wasn't causing me lasting psychological harm, because I didn't understand that, and that being smug is not the right response to being almost killed. It's not. It's not healthy. But I was wrapped up in the whole world. That whole world was growing. The whole undercover work was growing. It was being more sophisticated, and I was part of that conversation all the time, and it just felt like I was contributing to something really big. And that I could cope with the danger.
Yeah, because not many people can really understand. It's easy to say that's a bad way to react, but when you're in the sort of bubble in a way, it's sort of hard to sort of get this perspective from outside, especially if you can't talk to people about it from outside that bubble sort of thing. So it's only understandable, really. I want to talk about your time working with Pat, because I understand that there was some
with who? Sorry,
with Pat when he references Pat in the book,
right?
Where I understand when you would sort of doing forms of dealings, you would try to make each other laugh and you were sort of a bit childish in that way.
Yeah. We used to mess around. I worked with him on a job, and we were stupid because we were listening to because we were using a car for this job. We were making ourselves out to be not sort of street level drug consumers, but a bit of wheeler dealers. We were selling tobacco to people, which would get the tobacco from customs that they'd seized it, smuggled tobacco, and we'd be selling that. So we were pitching ourselves as wheeler dealers, and we would challenge each, because we were listening to the soundtrack from the film Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels in the car on the way. We would challenge each other to try and get quotes from the film when we were talking to people, which is really stupid.
That's
really, really stupid, because you start trying to think, well, what can I fit in? And saying things like, mate, it's a steal, it's a deal, it's a sale of the fucking century, and people give you the funniest look. And I remember walking away after buying some heroin. I turn over and say, mate, it's been emotional.
Ridiculous.
It was a bit ridiculous.
But it's I love that part though. I just love that idea that was the sort of dynamic you had. But at one point you were sat down, I understand, talking to these gangsters, and did Pat go to sort of, you talk about how you don't want to just give your story and blurt it out. You want them to sort of grab it from you. And at one point, did Pat break this rule? Yeah,
he did. And that's, I mean, there's lots of techniques to undercover work, but one of the most important things is you keep your cover story is yours, and you don't give it to people. They have to extract it in. And thinking of it in those terms means that it comes out in normal conversations. If someone actually asks you a question, where did you grow up? You think, well, that's out of context. Why are you asking me that? So you only respond that correct way if you own that cover story. But yeah, he this one occasion he just was giving it absolutely. It's like, I've got a cover story and you're gonna have it. It was really it was wrong, and he almost got us into some trouble with that one, because it freaked out this guy. I can't remember what he's called in the book, to be honest, because I have to give Peter. He's a pseudonym. I don't always remember the pseudonyms.
Yeah. So in this instance, when you give it away, how did you know when it was like right?
Well, he said, "Get out. No, can't do anything for you. No, get out."
And you just leave that.
But the thing is, we'd been manipulating this guy to introduce us to these people, and the guy who was suddenly spooked was saying to him, "Oh, these are no good," but he'd known us for a few weeks and he believed us completely. He wasn't picking up on this problem because he was past that he was past the period of time of suspicion. You see, he was already won over. So that was it's a very dangerous situation, and we survived it really just because the guy we were with was still on board.
Well, I want to talk to you about MSU because at this point that's sort of when MSU came about. And for those, can you just give a sort of brief description of what MSU was?
Well, what MSU is, it's still going. It's the East Midlands Special Operations Unit. MSU is the acronym. It's a bigger organisation for all covert policing for all different forms now, and they're very specialist. I know some people who work there, and they are they're hardworking. It's high-end police work, really. But then it was mostly about the undercover work. So it became a regional organisation, a regional control for undercover work, rather than each individual force.
And how did you find your first assignment at MSU and your first sort of period of time there? Because were the building blocks still sort of in place? Because I understand you were assigned like a cover operator who sort of I don't know is that the correct term? For the person who had to sort of
cover officer.
Yeah, cover officer, operator, who had to sort of look out for your well-being. And so there's sort of instances where maybe that wasn't being fulfilled and you were sort of being put in danger.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of a cover officer is to provide a buffer zone between the undercover cop and the investigating team or the investigating senior officer. Because obviously investigators, they think they want this and they think they can get it this way, but it's the undercover cop who actually knows what they can and can't achieve. So the cover officer is there to avoid pressure on the undercover cop and to create that buffer zone. So the cover officer speaks to the investigators, interprets what they want, and then tells them what is achievable, protecting the UC from that process. But it doesn't always work, and certainly in Leicester, there were two rival operations going on. 2 operations in one area. That was a big mistake, which never happened again, because it should never have happened. And but the problem is the DIs that were running it were rivals. They didn't like each other at all, and they were having contact between them, and it was all awful. So it was like it's bad enough doing an operation where it's about the numbers anyway. It's bad enough when the drive is not to make life safer, it's just about catching numbers of people. But this was also about rivalry. And so I was in the middle with that, really. There were major mistakes made, and the cover officer did not look after me in that instance at all. I
know there's a point where this sort of rivalry came to sort of a bus where you were laying down some groundwork with I believe it was Digsy who you selling coats to, and if you can sort of take us back to the start of that assignment and give us a bit of context to it.
Yeah, well, okay, so it was in Leicester City Centre and I was there for 6 months, and as I say, there was another job going on. Now earlier on in the operation, Digsy was someone who was quite a big hitter and of great interest to the team, a very significant character, and I bought some heroin off him quite early on, but then he came away from the street being hands-on. He was more of a sort of wholesaler, so he wasn't coming out. Now, early on in a job, you don't wear a wire or a camera or any equipment, not until you're trusted everywhere, because you don't want to risk being searched. So at that stage, I didn't have any footage, and we needed corroboration of him. So the job was coming to an end, and they really wanted corroboration of him. So, but trouble is, the other operation had just ended, so it was really risky to do this. But I thought, well, I'll do it. I was wearing a camera. I thought, well, for him, he's not going to come out and sell me drugs because he says he's not being hands-on. So what I did is I got hold of some counterfeit clothes, some counterfeit Stone Island jackets from customs again, and phoned him up and said, I've got some jackets to sell you, because I knew he really liked his clothes. And Stone Island was quite a big fashion item then.
Yeah, still is now, really, yeah.
So so he came out, but he brought 2 of his gangster mates with him who I'd not met before. So they were still in that initial suspicion stage. Anyway, he turns up and he looks at the coats and he says, well, you know, you just here to sell me these, or do you want to buy something? I'm thinking, right, okay. Well, I've bought heroin off you, but I never bought any crack. If I buy crack, that means you'll get an extra 12 months in prison for the 2 commodities. And that's the way I was thinking. So I says, oh, well, if you carry him white, I'll just have a 20 stone off you. So he gets this massive block of crack. I mean, massive, like bigger than a VHS case wide and thicker. And starts unpeeling the plastic from it. And so it sat in his driver's seat. In the meantime, his mate, this huge sort of 6'4" gangster, says, how long you known him? And I says, oh, we've known each other for months, haven't we, mate? We've known each other for months. I says, all right. How did you know him? And then he pushes me back and he starts picking at my buttons. And then he gets to the 3rd button, and what I'm wearing is not James Bond tech. When he's found this steel button with the camera in the middle, there's no doubt what it is.
It's very obvious.
Yeah, it's not a god. You know, you have to know to look for it. But he found it. He says, fucking hell, he is as well, man. He's fucking 5'0". He's 5'0", man. And I remember looking at him thinking, you're not old enough to have seen a Y50. Mind you, I don't suppose you are. But that's where the slang comes from. It comes from the old 60s and 70s TV programme. So anyway, I'm thinking, I'm actually in danger of being immediately murdered here. And
that's what you're thinking.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, it was quite clear I was in very significant risk. But one sort of advantage I had in working undercover is that when I had a moment of adrenaline, I got the sensation of everything slowing down and having the feeling that I had all the time in the world to think, which was quite useful. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to stop him convincing Diggsy that he's found what he's found. So the best way I can do that is to prevent that communication. So what I did is I thought, well, I'll have to be louder. So I started giving him a torrent of abuse, saying, you picking at my fucking clothes, what you doing picking at my clothes? It's not even my jacket, it's Jackie's coat. I picked it up this morning, never fucking seen it before. And then I took the jacket off him and started folding it up really slowly, and putting it back in the plastic. All the time giving him this complete torrent of abuse. And he's like completely stunned by this because it's not what he's expecting. He's obviously starting to doubt himself, what he's just found, and then he's reminding himself that he can't be wrong. And so you can see all these things going on his face, and I'm just shouting abuse at this huge guy. Like, you twat picking at my clothes. But I'm walking then really, really slowly across this car park because it's isolated. There's no one else around here. No one else around, so I had to get across this car park. I'm start walking slowly, still shouting.
Why slowly?
Well, because if you run away from a pack of wolves, they'll chase you. But if you walk really slowly, then there's doubt about whether you're prey or not. Because it had to look like I wasn't bothered by anything he'd found. So I walked purposely really slow, but still giving him this abuse constantly. And he's just stood there like, not even sure what had just happened. You can see, but he's saying to his mate, he's 5'0", but then he's saying, no, mate, I've known this geezer for months. He's sound, man. He's sound. So because he's not explained the detail of what he's found. So anyway, I get halfway across the car park and I hear this running behind me, these feet coming behind me. I think, right, okay, he's managed to convince him. I think if I can just swing round, get one punch in, and then leg it, I might get to near other people and survive. Anyway, it's Dixie. He comes behind me. He says, oh, mate, don't mind my mate. He's a dickhead. And I said, yeah, he is a dickhead. Yeah, he is the dickhead.
Couldn't believe your look.
No, he is a dickhead. And he's picking at my clothes and it's not even my coat. And he says, yeah, but man, don't you want your ting? And I'm thinking, you want to sell me crack now? So he's giving me this rock of crack and I give him the 20 quid, all in the centre of the camera as well, all framed perfectly in the camera. And his mate is screaming at him saying, he's fucking 5'0", like totally exasperated. So then he turns and goes back, and obviously when he gets there, he manages to convince him because I get to the edge of the car park and I can hear the wheels screaming, and it comes run straight after me at speed. So I leave the car park and I get onto the pavement, and by this I'm on the actual road and there are other cars. But it's the inner ring road in Leicester, and it's a dual carriageway. And as it comes to a roundabout, then there's like a steel railing to protect the pavement from the roundabout. So I'm sprinting for the railing, and the car's up the pavement behind me. But I get to the railing and the car can't go any further, so it screeches to a halt. And I look behind and it must have missed me by 1-2 metres. So then they bump onto the road and they go round the roundabout once. But then, because of where I am, actually, I get to the pedestrian area. I'm away from the road and safe actually really quickly because of the way that geography is there. So I start walking slower again. And then I'm gone and I'm amongst people. But when I went back to the debrief afterwards, I told them the car registration number and the description of these people. The Intel guy went away, obviously looked it up, came back, and he came back laughing. He says, I don't know why they didn't just shoot you. I says, why? He says, because there's loads of intelligence as a gun in that car. So, yeah.
That's a car chase and a half. That, like, I can't. No one can ever put themselves in that shoes of that danger, that moment, and to think on your feet that quick. With, I guess that's the only thing you could do, but still, just to not collapse and fold in on your character and you sort of maintain character. That's extremely like impressive that you've managed to somehow navigate your way out of that. Like, and after that, say, Anne said that wasn't even the best equipment available to you.
That was the best equipment available to me at the time. Yeah.
Did they have some? Because did they have something else that was only available for like level 1s, but that could have?
Yeah, which I found out later that there was much better equipment that was used by level 1s. Yeah, much better.
It's ridiculous. So after this, what sort of like how are you sort of feeling after that experience there?
Well, I was shaking, but again, I was quite pleased with myself that I could cope with all that. I actually had to do another job just after that as well. I had another job I was running as what we call a walk on part. Walk on part is where you become a character in someone else's operation, and I was doing a walk on part as a dealer for someone else. I had to put a phone call in as well to a job that I was doing in Lincolnshire, and that was difficult because I was already drained.
Yeah, and definitely after going through that, then it's a bit of a big ask to continue on for just the day after you say it as well.
No, and it's after I'd written the notes, the same day.
The same day.
Yeah, it was only it was only a phone call, but it was still hard.
Yeah,
it was not good.
But that's not. Is that? Would you say that's the closest you've came to being found out?
Well, I was found out.
Oh well, you were.
Yeah,
So you can't really come much closer.
No, I was found out. I mean, there was a few others, but yeah, that was the closest. That was the worst. Yeah.
Because there was a time when you were working with someone called Kate. And which dealers was this with, if you can remember?
This is the same job actually, and this had been a few days before. So this is actually before the car one. And this is because there's been another operation, and basically 2 rival gangs had compared notes and got together. That the fact that I was buying off so many people so many times and then moving on to another dealer, and so I arranged to do a deal, and they were all lined up, both gangs, along this wall. And I thought I was with Kate. I was with someone else, and yeah, I thought I was dead there, to be honest, and I could see at the end of this wall on the last one that they'd done like a rubbish fake wrap, like a screwed up piece of paper fake wrap, and I knew that if I challenged that, that's when it would kick off, and I knew that if I didn't challenge it, it would kick off. I was in a sort of trapped situation. So what I did, because I'd spotted that, what I decided to do is maintain the eye contact of the guy at the end and then pick it up without looking at it. So it looked like I'd picked it up without noticing it was a rip-off deal. So I'd given the money, kept eye contact and did that. And it sort of sidestepped both inevitable scenarios, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's sort of best thing you can do in that scenario. I wouldn't even thought to do that, but yeah.
But then he was bouncing. I mean, I thought when someone's ready to attack you, and they've got adrenaline, they've fueled themselves up with adrenaline, you see people bounce because they've got too much energy in their upper legs, and they're ready to go. And I thought, he's if he sets off, they're all going to come for me here. So thankfully, Kate was brilliant, because what she did is she dragged me away quickly and sort of played it like she was calming me down. So she said, Come on, just ignore them. It's fine. No, don't leave it. Like she was calming me down, and it was nice play by Kate. She was very good.
Yeah, because it gives you that sort of out.
It gave me the out, because I was playing a timid person anyway. I'm not likely to be the character that was going to respond, but the way she sussed it out is that's the way she could explain getting me away from them very quickly, and it played out all right, and we survived to fight another day.
So that's how long have you been in the force by this point? If rough, as we just saw.
Well, that was 2001, I think. So, or 2002. So yeah, well, I joined in '89. So 12, 13 years.
Now, one thing that I'm really interested to touch on is in the Nottingham job, where I believe it's Nottingham, where you have the group of friends, Cammy, Dave. Now, at this point, just to sort of give a very general gist of this, you befriend these people to come in contact with the dealers. But one bit, this probably is one of the most shocking bits that I found in the book, was where Cammy was quite upset about the death of his best friend, and he felt that he couldn't go to that funeral.
Yeah, well, I found him. He was leaning up against the shop window one day. It was just one of the places that you tended to meet up with people, and he was crying. So I said, "Oh, Cammy, man, what's up? What's going on?" And he said, "Well, my best mate from school that I had right from like infant school all the way through. I was friends with him up until the age of about 15, and then we went different ways. You know, I got into drugs and stuff, and he just carried on into getting into football and stuff. So he was always really fit. And he says he's just died on a football field. Just died playing football. He had a weak heart, no one knew. And he said, and look at the state of my life. It should be me that's dead, not him. The lifestyle I lead, he was fit. And I miss him, He said, I really miss him. And I regret walking away from the friendship. And I says, oh, man, well, you're gonna go to the funeral? And he looked at me like I was an idiot. He went, you're joking, aren't you? The last thing his family needs is some dirty smackhead turning up at their son's funeral. And it really hit me. It really hit me, because he didn't for one moment think he was worthy of turning up at a funeral, because the family would detest that because of who he was. And that's the impact of stigma. That's the impact of society's stigma towards him that's reflected back to him.
I think what that story does, it sort of humanises these people who are just like massively looked down on. Like that's what it personally did for me. I was like, because everyone can relate to that, and no matter what walk of life you're in, and the fact that he felt he wasn't good enough to go to his own, someone who he was very close with in the past best friend's funeral.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what stigma does, but that's what collectively our stigma of people who are struggling does. And if you remember, like I said earlier, he was struggling with some childhood demons. He was someone who was struggling and needed help, and instead he's stigmatized by almost everyone around him, so much so that he just takes on that image, that stigma.
So, were these genuine friendships that you would build with people? Would you say?
Well, I constantly wanted to learn about people and the scene that I was moving amongst, and to do that you have to learn about people, and to do that you have to use empathy. So actually now I see it as weaponizing empathy. That's the phrase that I use, because as an undercover cop, that's what I'm doing. I'm manipulating vulnerable people and taking advantage of them. So, but I'm learning. I'm empathizing. I'm feeling what they're feeling and having sympathy for what they're doing. But it was to turn against them, essentially. But you see, anyone who supports, anyone having still listened to me, all of this, and still supports the war on drugs in its form, you have to be aware this is what it means. This is what it's about. The front line of this war is causing harm to those people who need help. That's what this war is about. There are victims in this war.
Because do you feel like there's something that do you feel like criminals are getting more aggressive and they're not really subject to the police? The police aren't reaching them. They're only getting these vulnerable people who've just fallen on very hard times in life. They're not actually the ones doing the major criminal acts.
Well, the vulnerable people get roped into it, get arrested much more than the actual proper dealers. But don't get me wrong, the police do catch proper dealers. In fact, it's important to note that the police are absolutely brilliant at catching dealers. Brilliant. But that's part of the problem. It's because the police are good at it. So I'll put that into some context for you. If the police arrest a burglar in a town like Sunderland, if he's a fairly regular burglar, you've caught him, burglaries will go down because there's a limited number of people willing to commit that crime. If you catch a drug dealer, crime goes up because all you're doing is creating an opportunity for someone else. Police never reduce the size of the market. Never. But they do change the shape of it. And that changing shape is forever more violent. It's forever more intimidating. So, if you remember when I told you, when I first went to buy that stone of crack off the guy, and he said, "You take care now, don't get arrested." There wasn't as much violence. There wasn't as much threat. The violence that's grown over time is in direct response to the tactics that I used to use. It's a cause and effect. So, we never shrink the market by policing, but we change the shape of it. And the important thing to note there is that we actually thin out the competition for the most successful gangsters. And in fact, quite often, gangsters use police informants to get rid of the competition. So that's what the police are doing. They're doing a favour for the most successful gangsters. They're doing a favour.
This is something that, like you mentioned, police informants. This is something I had no idea about. But the fact that you were getting told at some points that like as if it's bound to happen. There's so much money in the drugs market. There's bound to be police informants. And at one point, you came across someone who you had a bit of a bad feeling about?
Yeah, well, that was the Nottingham job actually. About 4.5 months into the operation, before I got introduced to a fairly tasty gangster who was connected to the gang I was interested in. The gang I was interested in was a group called the Bestwood Cartel, run by a gangster called Colin Gunn, who was a proper maniac. And he was letting it be known on the streets that if he caught an undercover cop, he'd be tortured to death. He'd be snatched away in a van and tortured to death. And that's what he was letting it be known. By that stage, the gangsters knew we were out there. So 4.5 months in, finally got introduced to this gangster. He interrogated me with a knife pressed into my bollocks, which is not very comfortable. I can assure you, it's really not. It's a little unsettling, actually, if I'm honest. But anyway, the next day, 2 of my backup team went off sick. So I got 2 new people who I'd not met before, 2 new police officers. And I met the first one, shook his hand, no problem. And the second one, he just made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. There's just something about this guy which was wrong, completely wrong. So I said to the SIO, the guy running the job, I says, "Boss, I can't have this guy knowing what I'm doing. I don't feel comfortable with it." So he was great. He says, "Yeah, well, we'll exclude them both, so there's no questions. And we'll just run with less people." So I didn't think much of it after then. The job came to an end. We caught lots of people, a very successful operation. That operation led on to another one that was a very, very brilliant operation by Nottinghamshire Constabulary. And eventually Colin Gunn was brought down less than 12 months later. And when he was brought down, it was found that that police officer, who I had taken exception to, was an employee of the gangster, employee of Colin Gunn. He'd been paid to join the police, mind, not corrupted once he was in there, paid to join, and he was paid £2,000 a month on top of his police wages, plus bonuses for good information. Now, he'd been in the police for 7 years as a mole like that. Now, in the debrief for that, by then I got used to the fact that drug money caused corruption. I'd got used to that. But it was a bit too up close and personal, you know. So in the debrief of that, senior police said to me, well, Woodsy, yeah, of course this happens. With this much money involved, how can this not happen? So we should all consider that senior police across the country know very well that the money from the illicit drugs market is corrupting the police, and it's accepted. But shouldn't the public be aware of how accepted that is and how common it is? And if the public were aware of it, would we not demand a change in policy? Because in a regulated market, if drugs were regulated like alcohol is and tobacco is, that corruption is impossible.
That's I can, as soon as I found out, I was there's definitely no information out there. I always thought it was a myth, really. That I very naively thought that it's the police. There's no real corruption, but after finding that out, then obviously drug policy, it makes so much sense just to sort of section off that market, and then it's weird, like all this evidence is combating what you're talking about, and it's weird. There's not much of a, there should be more of a push really towards that.
Yeah, I mean, I have to make something absolutely clear. The only thing that can pay for that level of corruption is the money from the illicit drugs market. There's nothing else can pay for that. So there's no other form of criminality has the same value. Nothing. But not only that, the way we police drugs creates monopolies. So, basic economic truth. In any unregulated market, monopolies appear. It's basic economics. But for the illicit drugs market, the police actually help those monopolies grow. Because by thinning out the competition, you get bigger and bigger monopolies, and that monopolisation happens over time. But the knock-on effect of that monopolisation is that fewer people have a share of the pie, which means they've got each individually got more money to corrupt the system. So by policing drugs, we're perpetually increasing the amount of corruption.
And the police are happy because they're just getting statistics, they're getting arrests. Well,
most police don't understand this. Not until you actually have the conversation with them. Generally, every single police officer I've talked this through with in the last couple of years, every single one of them said, yeah, you're right. But a lot of them, it hasn't quite clicked into place that just how much of a cause and effect there is there, that actually policing drugs is creating a disaster. It's eating away at our society like a cancer of corruption.
And I think the reason, there's no counter argument really to it. You just have, once you have opened yourself up and going on and you listen.
It's not even that complicated, is it?
It's not like,
not really.
I'm
just
no
logic.
expert. It's just like, yeah, it is. It's just, it's very basic logic. I'm just thinking, like, what would you, if say if you didn't go with your instinct there and your gut, what do you think could have happened? If you would like, I don't want him out, and you thought, nah, I'll leave it. It's just probably I'm feeling weird.
Well, I mean, from his point of view, the stuff I was doing was low level. He was a proper high-end gangster. But having said that, the guy was legendarily a maniac and was quite into his own legend of killing people. So I think I was at risk.
You worked on an assignment focusing on the Burger Bar Boys, who were, as I understand, sort of an infamous gang of sorts. So what was this maybe your biggest operation to this point?
Yeah, the Burger Bar Boys probably was the biggest. They're an infamous gangster group gang from Birmingham, famously rivaled with the Johnson crew when they take their hobbies was shooting each other. Essentially, one of the Burger Bar Boys that I was targeting, he was implicated in 7 different murders in Birmingham. But what they'd done is they'd moved from Birmingham and taken over the supply in Northampton. And of course, the reason they did that is because the local police had lots of success against their local dealers. So the big boys from the city move in, and that's what happens. You know, it helps the monopolies grow. But the Burger Bar Boys were a whole new level. They were using gang rape as control, intimidation. They were doing the normal kind of gangster stuff like maimings and beatings and stuff. But yeah, they were using gang rape as a just part of the rotation.
Who would they target with this?
You got a drug debt, you got a sister, pay the drug debt, or you know what's happening, or they would rape sex workers who had a debt. And at the time, Northampton was probably the biggest red light area in the region, actually, and it was in this particular industrial area. And in fact, one day, there's a car I'd been getting in. Once I'd got into them and I was buying off them, the car that I got into, one day at the morning briefing, they said, right, we've heard on the grapevine, it's good police intelligence that five of the Burger Bar boys have gang raped this woman in this car. Now, we don't think she's going to report it, but if she does, we have to treat this with a full investigation. So they said, if you get in that car and you come out again, then we're going to have to meet you and seize your clothes because you'll be part of the crime scene potentially then. But when I met them, they were in a different car. And in fact, the car that they'd done it in, they parked up at the edge of the town and set fire to.
God.
I mean, she never reported it anyway, but they weren't taking any risks, and they fight it.
Yeah, they were very organised in that matter. How did you sort of progress with that take, and how did it come to fruition that you managed to sort of get them?
Well, I mean, I spent weeks manipulating vulnerable people to get them to introduce me to them, and eventually this chap who got friendly with. I mean, I spent time sort of making myself out to be a travelling shoplifter. I did go shoplifting sometimes. It's great fun, by the way.
Is that like a little mini game within the job?
Oh, but it is such fun, especially if you're doing it with someone else and you take it in turns to be lookout. But you've got to have the get out of jail free card, haven't you? Like I had for it to be fun, I suppose.
Did you ever get caught?
No, not shoplifting. I mean, when did I get arrested? I almost got arrested driving a car when the guy suspected me driving without insurance. Trying to think. But no, I didn't get caught doing that. But anyway, this guy I got friendly with, he took me eventually to meet the Burger Bar boys, and he took me to this snooker club in the centre of Northampton. Got directed straight into the toilets. The door banged open and this hooded figure came in, went into the cubicle, stood on the toilet and looked over the end of the cubicle and said, "What's this?" And then the door burst open again and 4 hooded figures came in and they started walking around me. And then no time at all, one of them had headbutt me on the side of the head, on the side of the ear. And then another one would push me back, or I'd get punched in the rib or elbowed in the rib. And all the time this is happening. He's asking me questions and he's asking my mate questions.
I imagine you're anticipating the next sort of...
Well, to be honest, I was sort of slowly coming to the conclusion I wasn't getting out of there in one piece. I knew their reputation. I knew they like to beat people to a pulp. And I just thought this isn't going to end well at all. You could just feel the imminent violence in the air, you know. But so it went on. Oh God, it felt like it went on forever. Probably about 10, 15 minutes. I don't know. But eventually he said, "All right, what do you want?" And as soon as he said that, they just walked out. So I said, "I'll have 1 and 1, please." Meaning a 0.4 of heroin, a 0.4 of crack. So I gave him a 40 quid. Gave him a deal. Got his phone number. And then I was into them then. I spent the next few months gathering evidence of conspiracy against the 6 Burger Bar boys who were running Northampton, but also all of the other people they were connected with, because they just controlled everything. They had runners everywhere. And through the space of that job, 7-month job, 96 people there was evidence against. 96 people. And I knew there was no one else left to catch. There was no new numbers to get, no new people to meet. I'd met everyone, I knew. So we knew we could do the bus because everyone was wrapped up. Police from 5 different forces involved in that. It was absolutely massive operation, massive.
Were you the only undercover person on this operation, or was there 7?
No, there was. I did the bulk of it. I got into the Burger Bar boys, but I got invited into. I actually didn't start that one. I got invited because the two people on it had tried to meet the Burger Bar boys, and they'd been threatened and couldn't get close. So I was brought in. So there was 2 others as well. But for the most part, the Burger Bar boys team that was my stuff. So 7 months, 96 people. Lots of raids, lots of doors being kicked in. A week later, spoke to the intelligence guy who said, "Yep, we managed to interrupt the drug supply for a full 2 hours." 2 hours.
Well, then...
And that's how long it took for the new phone number to be on the streets.
Well,
and everyone had... That's not even enough time to withdraw from heroin. You need 4 hours for that.
That's ridiculous.
2 hours.
Well, this must massively just emphasise your case here, where it's like...
Well, it shows just how ludicrous this is. This is completely insane. And this is still going on now. All that time. And I thought I was going to die 1, 2, possibly 3 times in that operation. And
what were the other instances where you thought?
Well, one time I thought one day they're looking at me a bit sus. I was wearing a camera at the time, and I thought one morning, should I wear the camera today? Should I? I decided not to. Anyway, I met them, and they said, "You're 5-0, white boy. Get in the car." And they took me to the edge of the race course, and showed me a gun tucked into some pants, and said, "Right, strip. You're wearing a wire." So they stripped me naked in the afternoon in this public parking in Northampton. And I remember thinking, thank fuck I took that camera off this morning. I went through all that. I manipulated vulnerable people. I caused harm to people. All of those people arrested, all of that police time and energy. In 2 hours, the phone number was out there. No one went without a drug, not for a moment. And actually, looking back on it, you can almost picture the scene. Because famously, the Burger Bar Boys' rival gang is the Johnson crew. Now, I don't know that it was the Johnson crew who stepped in. Mm-hmm. But you can sort of imagine the scene, can't you? The Johnson crew are up in Birmingham, and they hear on the grapevine, guess what's just happened to the Burger Bar Boys? And they're thinking, oh, great, nice one, serves them right, get the scum in jail. And then they're thinking, right, boys, put the phone call in, buy some extra gear, we're going to make a killing. Get ourselves down to Northampton, get the numbers out there. And that's all it would take, 2 hours. It's about an hour and 10 minutes drive between Birmingham and Northampton.
Yeah. And that just grows their control as well. And then their money.
And they're thinking, go the police, got rid of our main rivals. Yay. And that's what's happened. Because, what we do, we fill the jails up. Yeah, we fill the jails up. We've got the most full jails in Europe. We're talking about building more jails. Half of the people are in there for drugs or associated with the drugs trade. We're just going to keep building more jails. You could quadruple the amount of people in jail, and it's still not. All it's going to do is make the streets more violent. Because if you increase the level of threat, the level of violence from organised crime increases to match it. Because they don't want to get caught, and they'll intimidate people all the more to avoid being caught. So you increase the punishments.
Raising stakes just constantly.
You raise the stakes, you raise the violence. Basic, simple effect of what happens on the street.
Have you thought of, say in a world where you get what your new drug policy, it's all government controlled, and that market goes away. What do you think will happen to the people who are going into that market as dealers? Because to go in and do these awful things, they're not going to be just go and become an accountant somewhere. What do you think?
Well, I mean, society's got to heal. Mm-hmm. We've got it's 3 generations now since the drug war in the UK. Society's got to heal because there's people. I've met 16-year-olds who are really quite nice people, quite cheeky. You can have a laugh with them. 6 months later, they're terrifying because they're having to adapt and learn how to be terrifying to exist in this scene. So it's already damaged a lot of people. Yeah, it's going to take a lot of healing, but if we don't stop now, it's just going to keep getting worse and there's going to be much more violent people. But in terms of criminality, well, it's worth remembering that crime's not caused by criminals. It's caused by opportunity. And the biggest opportunity for crime ever is the illicit drugs market. So if you take that away, most drug dealers I've known would never consider committing any other crime because it's too high a risk and too little gain. Mm. So you really will reduce crime and violent crime overnight like that. So
how did you end up leaving the police, and then you went on to what you're doing now? I'm sort of wondering how did that transition happen?
Well, I mean, I had a bit of a mental breakdown because when I was causing harm to problematic heroin users, I was justifying what I was doing. I was sort of telling myself that the end justified the means because at the end of the operation I catch the bad guy. But that's the logic of the battlefield. That's like a general sacrificing a platoon to win a battle. and that's got no place in civil society and civil policing. So when I eventually realised that actually all I was doing here is actually increasing the violence, that then I look back on all the harm I've caused, and the end didn't justify the means at all. Actually, I was just causing harm to people. So that was really hard to take, and that over time really just ate away at me. So I resigned. I tried to change things within the police, to be honest, but I don't know what I thought I could achieve. I became a drugs expert, got on the involved in the national police expertise in drugs, but it was the wrong forum to try and influence anything. You know, these are people who are completely wrapped up in the empire of drugs investigation. So I couldn't change anything with the police, and I thought, I've got to get out. The only way I can change something, and it took a real mental breakdown to come to that conclusion. I've got to get out. I've got to do something from the outside, so I can be free to say everything. You know, explain everything that's going on.
So you're now the chairman in the UK for LEAP. Now, what is this?
Well, LEAP is a United Nations accredited organisation. We are accredited at the United Nations Committee on Narcotic Drugs, so we can be part of the events in Vienna and New York. Oh. We started in the United States. We are called the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. We're more often known by the acronym of LEAP UK here in the UK, but we're growing rapidly across the world, because it's not just me that realises this. Actually, there's a lot of clever cops out there who realise just how much harm the drug war is doing, and we are a growing number. So we've launched LEAP Scandinavia. We've got speakers. We're about to launch LEAP France and LEAP Europe. We've got LEAP Germany. We have LEAP Australia. We have members all over the place. And as I say, we are growing rapidly as an international movement. So please, anyone out there, if you do agree with me, whether you agreed with me before or whether you're just coming to that conclusion now, then if you are in agreement, you're part of the social movement. And you, as the social movement, you're more important than politicians. Social justice issues like this, they grow through social movement. So homosexuality was illegal once. That changed not through political leadership, but through the social movement. And every one of us involved in the social movement has a duty to do something to contribute to the growth of that movement, which means talking to other people, which means asking other people to also watch this podcast, asking people to follow LEAP UK on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter. We are at UK LEAP. We're the same on Instagram. So please follow us, share what we do, get involved, support us. Please, we're always desperate for financial contributions. You know, we really struggle. We have to travel places to speak to people, and we rely on donations, really. We rely on help. So, yeah, that's a LEAP.
Well, it goes without saying, all the links to what he's just mentioned there are going to be in the description. Honestly, I could, if you were to have your ideal scenario, what would it be? What would you change? What say you were pitching now, the ideal drugs policy?
Okay, well, I'll answer your question, but first I'll give a caveat that it's not just me that's involved in this. Now, my role is to explain the policing perspective and the desperate need for reform and the harm that our current policy is causing. But I was, as a detective sergeant, one of the things that made me realise that I could bring change is because there's an incredible organisation called Transform Drug Policy Foundation, and they've worked out, very clever academic people have already worked out exactly how we achieve this.
Okay.
So they produced a book which is called Blueprint for Regulation. So the answers are all there. You know, the every policy detail, every answer you might come up with has been answered. Now, so I am quoting Blueprint to an extent, but also certain things that's important to me personally. But the first thing you would do in reforming drug policy is go back to the British system. And the British system was the last resistance against American-style prohibition, because the drug war is an American idea. It's very un-British, actually. The British system, which ended at the end of the 1960s, particularly for heroin, meant that if you had a problem with drugs, you went to the doctor and got help. There was no moral judgment.
It seems quite logical, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, there was no moral judgment. There was no moral failing. It was just an unfortunate condition.
The other way is just forcing some sort of disconnect between the people who are suffering. Because if you look at it from they're suffering from this rather than, oh, look what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. So, but what that meant in Britain was the doctor would prescribe you heroin. He would prescribe you heroin, not methadone or any other substitution, actual heroin, which meant that you were suddenly rescued from the exploitation of a dealer. But there wasn't any dealers because it was all medical. That's why there was only 1,000 people using it, because it was a medical model. So I would immediately go back to that. Now, near to here in Middlesbrough, they've just started prescribing heroin again. 2 weeks ago, actually. It's in a too clinical and too limited way for my taste, but it's still a fantastic step in the right direction. So in Middlesbrough, they are now taking care of people instead of persecuting them. An important step, but I want the whole of the UK to go back to the British style of doing that. So heroin's actually the easiest drug to legally regulate. You just go back to the doctors looking after it rather than gangsters. It's not complicated. You don't even have to change the laws. But then for cannabis, cannabis is urgent because gangsters recruit children through the teenage cannabis market, and we should be protecting our children from gangsters. You do that by regulating like we do alcohol. You have to decide how strong the drug is, how you label it, how you package it, where it's going to be sold, where it's going to be consumed. These are the regulatory issues. Not too difficult, really. I personally think that even though I take a public health approach and that weaker products should be available, I also believe that if people want the extremely strong stuff, they should be allowed to have it, because we don't want an illicit market. And for some people's medical conditions, actually, they need extremely high levels of THC. So who am I to judge anyway? It's their bodies, isn't it? We should have total autonomy over our own mind and body. Surely that should be the basic human right. But surely.
You make a very good point, really.
Yeah,
I don't see what the counter-argument could be.
Well, there isn't. As soon as you accept that as human beings, we are in charge of our own mind and our own body, no one's going to force me to take a drug I don't want to take because I'm in charge of my body. So it works the other way. If I want to take a certain drug, then that's up to me because it's my mind and my body. If we start from that premise, the rest is quite straightforward, because then the question is, okay, if it's everyone's right, how do we make it as safe as possible? And that's where your regulation comes in. And then you've got your middle drugs, your stimulants, things like MDMA. Now, MDMA is a very important one because it's the perfect example of a drug which is not banned because it's dangerous. It's dangerous because it's banned. Because all of the deaths and problems that come with MDMA is because it's an unregulated product. It's because tablets are 3 or 4 times too strong. It's 4 doses in one tablet. That's an unregulated product that kills people. Or it's a different drug. It's PMA rather than MDMA, and people are buying something. It's not what they expect. Regulation ends that risk. It removes that risk. So MDMA is the perfect example. There were 74 people died of MDMA last year. Mm-hmm. If that drug was regulated, those people would not have died.
So if that was regulated, that drug, that would not harm your body if you have the correct amount?
No, it's a pretty safe substance. It's really safe. It would be incredibly rare for someone to have a reaction and die from it. Incredibly rare. If you had a blister pack from the pharmacy, exactly measured dose with clear instructions and advice from the pharmacist, you've got very little problems as long as you're looking after yourself in the right way. It's just like learning how to consume alcohol safely, but alcohol will never be as safe as MDMA.
You make a very good point there, because like alcohol is in such easy grasp. You literally have anyone can get so there's 12-year-olds who will be having a drink right now.
Well, but I don't. No, that's not strictly true. Actually, I have to contradict you there, because actually there is less underage drinking of alcohol than there's ever been in this country.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an important point, isn't it?
You want to go to my village on a night?
Yeah. I mean, there's always examples of where that's not the case, but it is a basic truth anywhere in this country that it's far easier for a 13-year-old to get hold of cannabis than alcohol.
Really?
It's far easier for them to get hold of MDMA than alcohol. significantly easier. And that has to be understood, because that really is true. Because dealers don't ask for ID. Dealers don't care. They just want to see the colour of your money. And so if you want to protect children, that's one of the most important reasons for regulation, to stop that underage sales. So you remove it from the dealer and give it to a licensed pharmacist.
In the book, you talk a lot about fighting the good fight. Do you finally feel like now that's what you're doing?
Yeah, because as a young man, I was very much invested in, I might have flipped a coin to go into the police, but after a few years, I was really involved in fighting the good fight, doing the right thing, catching the bad guy, protecting the weak people, and then I realised I wasn't doing that. I was harming the weak people. I wasn't fighting the right fight at all. But now I am, yeah. And as part of a rapidly growing team, I am now fighting the good fight, yes.
Have you ever thought, what if that coin just landed on the other side, and you went to do business at university?
God, I don't know. Well, I'd never ended up doing business. I might have gone fruit picking. I might have done that, and my life, I'm sure, would have been more relaxing anyway.
Neil, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Is there anything that you want to say before we wrap this one up?
Just one last thing. If there's any activists out there, you may have noticed that the police have increased social media posts about drugs. So they do a raid and they see all these drugs and they take photographs of them, and they present this on social media and they show, look what a great job we're doing.
Seen that a lot.
You've seen it a lot, and it's growing, isn't it? Now, a lot of activists, particular cannabis activists, are responding on those social media threads saying things like, oh, well done, you've taken someone's medicine. Oh, crime of the century. Haven't you got anything better to do? And it's interesting that conversation is playing out on social media, and a lot of people listening to this will recognise that. Well, what my co-writer and I, because I write with a proper writer, much cleverer than me. my co-writer and I discussed this, and we came up with an idea of what we could do that would actually potentially have much more impact than those comments, because we came at it from a policing perspective. So I know how to get under the skins of police officers who post those things. I do. So this piece of writing, and you'll probably have the link for it. We did it originally for Filter Mag in the United States, so it's shared around America. We've had it translated into German, French, Spanish, Polish. So it's being shared by activists all over the place, and it's designed as a tool for activists. So if you post this article with just the polite police officers who posted this, would you please consider reading this? And that will get under the skin of them, because what it is, it explains. There's the original principles of policing were written in 1829 by Sir Robert Peel. They set out what policing should be, and that all of those principles still apply today. Principle number 7, for example, is the police are the community and the community are the police. The police are merely the people who wear the uniform. But the drug war has ended that link. Principle number 9 of 9 is, and I'm paraphrasing, that the success of the police is the absence of crime. It is not the visible activity of the police. So, where the police post these successful pictures of a raid, a load of cannabis plants, or whatever it is, they're claiming, look, we're successful. But they're breaching Peel's principle number 9, because they are not showing the absence of crime. Because as we've just been discussing, the drug war contributes to crime, it does not end it. So they're only showing evidence of police activity, not the absence of crime. So they are clearly breaching Peel's principle number 9. So what we do in this piece of writing is to explain that in terms that the police will really think, oh my God. And in some officers' case, it will persuade them, because they know, and these cops care about doing the right thing. They do. So that's why this piece of writing is a tool for people to use. And the more often it's used, if it's used a lot over time, it will find its way into police collective knowledge. If it's used a lot, and we know it's been used a lot in some countries, which is great. And next year we're going to do a a video version of it. But I want to try and lay the land with the written one first. So any help, please use it as a tool. And trust me, if enough people use it, it will make a difference eventually.
Well, definitely, because any random comment they can just look at, like, oh, just disregard it. But something that's concrete, and you obviously know what you talk about. You know, the police, the people who work in the police.
Yeah, I'm talking to things they understand.
Exactly. That'll definitely be in the link down below, Neil. Honestly, mate, it's been extremely interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Boom.